What we have to remember is that our eyes are not all we have for seeing with, maybe not even the best we have. Our eyes tell us that the mountains are green in summer, and in autumn the colors of flame. Our eyes tell us that the small country church down the road needs a new coat of paint, and that the stout lady who plays the pump organ looks a little like W.C. Fields, and that the pews are rarely more than about a quarter filled on any given Sunday. But all these things are only facts, because facts are all the eye can see. Eyes cannot see truth. And it was these words from Frederick Buechner in a sermon he wrote so many years ago, The Seeing Heart, that inspired me to not listen to the naysayers and to take a leap of faith and to serve a rural church that was struggling. It was Frederick Buechner's words who inspired me to start living my life, seeing with my heart. Because when I began to see with my heart, I began to see God. I began to see possibilities where people said there were no possibilities. So welcome to Old Stonewell Farm, where summer seems to be coming to an end, but the God moments are still flourishing. And today we remember Frederick Buechner, a writer who inspired me, and I hope that his words of wisdom will leave you more enriched this day. My early sermons that I preached in my first call, which was at a small rural church, to use that quote from Frederick Buechner about how some people might see a small country church that is struggling and in need of repair, but they're only seeing with their eyes and they're not seeing with their heart. So I wanted to use that quote from Frederick Buechner to inspire them, to give this congregation hope. Now, I came up this way from living in Manhattan and growing up in northern New Jersey. I came up to upstate New York and serving a church that was right on the border of Vermont, where I now live. And I came with all my books from seminary, and many of those books that I placed on my shelves here in my home office were from Frederick Buechner, a Presbyterian minister who has the title of never ever serving a church as a pastor. He was an ordained Presbyterian minister who saw his writing as a ministry. He died August 15th, and he was 96 years old. So he has lived an amazing life, and he inspired so many people. In fact, my colleagues in ministry were taking to social media and sharing how he inspired their preaching. I'm not going to give a eulogy of Frederick Buechner. Other media outlets have done a wonderful job doing that. But for me, he was an inspiration because his words really reached me and challenged me, like seeing with my heart. So when I used this quote from Frederick Buechner in one of my early sermons at my new church, my new country church, I wanted to give them hope. I wanted to share with them that if they saw with the eyes of their heart, they could see that they were worthy. They could see that there was a vibrant ministry going on. The whole world around them is saying, you're dying, this church should close. But I wanted them to know, no, with God, all things are possible. So I reached for my Frederick Buechner books and I pulled that quote for my sermon. And a week later, a gentleman came in to the sanctuary. It was Sunday morning, and he was a local Catholic. So he used to stop by the Presbyterian church on his way to Mass just to chat with me. So I was busy getting ready to lead worship and just setting up things. And he said, so, how do you know Freddie? And I had no idea who he was talking about. How do I know Freddie? And I looked at him blankly, and he asked again, how do you know Freddie? And I said, Freddie who? Who are you talking about? And this man turned to me and he said, Freddie, you quoted him in your sermon. He read my sermon. At that time, I posted my sermons online. And I looked at him and I still couldn't recall, like, who is he talking about? Freddie. I didn't quote any Freddie in the sermon. Finally, he said, Freddie Buechner. How do you know Freddie Buechner? And I looked at him and I'm like, Freddie Buechner? I said, you mean Frederick Buechner? My Princeton Theological Seminary snobbiness, I guess, was coming out. And he was like looking at me. He's like, I'm sorry. Now this is really the God moment here. He said to me, I'm sorry, but everyone around here knows him as Freddie Buechner. And I'm like, wait a minute. Everyone around here? What do you mean around here? And that's when he said something that I had no idea. He's like, you live right down the road from him. I was floored. I did not realize that where God called me was right in Frederick Buechner's, I was about to call him Freddie, right in Frederick Buechner's backyard. Here I was, an aspiring pastor, a writer, who loved the works of Frederick Buechner, who for years have read his books, have been inspired by his books. And then I had no idea that I actually moved in to where he lived and bought the oldest house here in this little village in Vermont, which is right down the mountain road from Frederick Buechner. I was amazed. So when he said, everyone around here knows him as Freddie, and sure enough, I began hearing the Frederick Buechner stories. I once was visiting a Methodist pastor. We were having tea one day, and she said, oh yeah, Freddie Buechner. I always got his mail in my post office box, at the small little post office here. And I always had to return it to him. And then there was the veterinarian who really tended to all the farm animals. And he was like, oh yeah, Frederick Buechner. I remember him coming in. So there were a lot of Frederick Buechner stories. And I'm still amazed how God led me to live here, to be inspired by what his eyes saw, to walk the fields, to admire the green mountains, to drink in all the beauty here in Vermont that perhaps inspired Frederick Buechner as well in his writing. And it's just one more time a reminder for us all how God is leading us, that God knows what is really in our hearts and who we are and our passions and our desires. I also find it amazing that where I live, not only is Frederick Buechner, his home, up the mountain road, but down the other way, going south here in Vermont, is the home of Robert Frost. So two influential writers that have informed me, that have inspired me. I'm like sandwiched, I'm in between them. It's like I'm right in the middle of Robert Frost and Frederick Buechner. And being a writer, I can't just think that is a coincidence. And I wonder why God has called me up here. So Frederick Buechner inspired me and gave me the courage with his words to take that rural church many years ago when my close friends were telling me, don't do it. You can, get a job at a bigger church, a city church, a larger church, a more prestigious pulpit. And yet when I read Frederick Buechner's words about that country church and what we can see of it if we saw with the eyes of our heart, it just filled me with a desire to go and challenge myself, to go to the hard places, to go to the hard people, to go where others say, don't go, and challenge myself to see such situations, such places, such people with my heart. So when Frederick Buechner wrote that sermon, The Seeing Heart, it was the thing, one of many things that led me to say yes to stepping out of my comfort zone. Frederick Buechner wasn't done inspiring me. In 2016, when I was serving a church down in Maryland, my husband and I, we still owned this house in Vermont. And I felt this call to come back to Vermont, this incredibly strong call, and it didn't make sense at all. And that was once again when I turned to the words of Frederick Buechner. He encouraged me once again to step out of my comfort zone because I was going back to an area where there wasn't really any church jobs available. It's an area where the churches are struggling. And I remembered how Frederick Buechner was an ordained Presbyterian pastor who never served a church. He saw his writing as a ministry, and so that gave me the courage to also see my writing as a validated ministry. In a way, he was a trailblazer because nowadays we are reimagining what is the role of a pastor, what is a validated ministry. It doesn't have to be just serving a church and standing behind a pulpit on a Sunday morning, as I am here from Old Stonewall Farm coming to you. Yes, we lost a wonderful man who inspired many, but we keep that inspiration going by sharing his story, by sharing our stories. In fact, that's the one thing that Frederick Buechner always talked about, that when he wrote, he's writing his story. And, he said, my story is perhaps your story as well. And that is why we need to share our stories with one another. And so today I invite you to really step out of your comfort zone, to find those writers in your life that have inspired you, to turn to scripture for inspiration, to take words of wisdom and really have them enter into your heart. I challenge you to also see the world with your heart, because once you do start seeing with your heart, you start seeing how God sees, and you see the light in the darkness, and you see the possibilities where there seems to be dead ends. So I am excited right now for our time together to take you to Frederick Buechner's Vermont, to his backyard, to walk where he has walked, and to take in all the beauty that has inspired him.